everyone, this is Santiago from Neurofeedback, and today we are going to do a QEEG or a brain map analysis of a professional golfer. In my practice, many clients from all different walks of life come to me in order to find out why they're not feeling well or behaving differently, and why their performance in whatever they do is not optimal. And athletes are not the exception. So this is a professional golfer who sought my services for his focus and his concentration during the golf rounds. And the first thing that we did was to run in QEEG, a quantitative electroencephalogram, or a brain map. And what we want to do here is to show the athlete why his performance is not the way he would like it to be, the way he knows it can be, and where in the brain this is originating from, where in the brain it's happening, and why it's hindering his training, his practices, and his competitions. And we run the QEEG, we run a baseline EEG for 10 minutes with the eyes open and 10 minutes with the eyes closed. And then we do the analysis and the interpretation of the brain waves in order to find out what this brain is telling us, what's the story with this brain and why it's not working up to par. And the first thing we look at is the amplitude of the brain wave, meaning the size of the brain wave. And there are two types of brain waves produced by the brain: fast frequencies, fast in speed, and slow frequencies, slow in speed, the way they cycle per second. Now, the amplitude, referring to the size, it's going to tell us whether the brainwave is fast or slow. And when we have high amplitudes, such as this one's observed here, then we know that we have slow frequencies. So these are frequencies in the delta theta of range. Because the general premise is the higher the amplitude, the slower the frequency. And knowing the amplitude and the frequency of those brainwaves is really important because it tells us a lot about arousal or activation, meaning the capacity for the person to do things well at a certain moment in time, depending on the task at hand. So if we have hyperarousal, if we have excess arousal from deviating from that ideal level, we're going to have somebody who's going to be anxious or angry or irritable, different things that are going to put him into a high-speed mode of doing things, and his performance or her performance is not going to be optimal. It's not going to be the best one. On the other hand, we have hypoarousal. We have lower than we expect. We're going to have somebody who gets tired a lot of the time, who loses their focus frequently, who has trouble concentrating, trouble remembering things. So when we are talking about the brain, we're talking about self-regulation. We want to teach that brain to self-regulate and to achieve a certain level of arousal or activation at a certain point in time. And then when it's not required, that brain can rest and recover and save energy. So the first thing we want to look at when we talk about that is just to look at the amplitude of the brain waves. And if we do a sweep of the EEG, we are going to start noticing that high amplitudes, meaning slow frequencies, are mostly dominant on this EEG. Now, there might be also fast frequencies embedded within those slow frequencies, which could be the case here. But when we're looking at it, we're looking at slow frequencies and high amplitudes for the most part. That, to begin with, is telling us that this brain is getting tired rather quickly. And for a professional golfer, that's not good at all. Because if the brain is getting tired constantly, it means that his performance is going to be affected greatly, in that he's not going to be able to concentrate on the shot. He's going to get tired very quickly, and his decision making is not going to be the most optimal. His yardage and the club selection and everything that has to do with course management can also be greatly affected, and it's going to interfere and hinder with those issues. When you play a round of golf, usually you go for 4 to 4.5 hours. If you play regular stroke play, tournament style, if you're playing match play or the different formats of the game, that you can play for up to 36 holes per day, which is about 8 hours in the golf course. So the brain needs to have a certain level of stamina and energy to be able to help the athlete perform ideally and perform well and gain more consistency in their performance, whether it's during practices or competitions. So if we look at this, we're looking at a brain that's getting tired, and this brain is getting tired because it's not receiving as much glucose and oxygen as we want it to. So oxygen and glucose being the fuel that the brain needs to perform optimally to keep that energy and that stamina going for certain periods of time. And if we have that, we're going to have a golfer who's going to get tired very quickly, who's going to start forgetting things, who's going to start acting impulsively, who's not going to be able to judge distances and read the greens and the club selection and talk to the caddy adequately. And those are all elements that are important for good performance, for peak performance. So we have brain that's getting tired, we have a golfer that's getting tired, and every now and then we have bursts of those low brainwave activities which go from the front of the head to the back of the brain. So they go from the prefrontal cortex all the way to the occipital cortex. And if we drag the channel, we can see that they are stable. So there's what we call field and phase, meaning more than one part of the brain, more than one network is going to be, it's going to be activated, it's going to be affecting or creating the source of the performance issue that the person is presenting with. And the other thing, other than field and phase, when they overlap rather nicely, like as we see here, nicely meaning not good for performance, but for analysis purposes, we have phase stability. So they're moving in phase and they're being stable, and phase stability drives up what we call hypercoherence. And hypercoherence means that the brain is overcompensating for something that is not happening. So this is a brain that it's on overdrive a lot of the time, and it's compensating, it's working twice or 3 times as hard as it really needs to. And that's going to create more exhaustion, more fatigue, more difficulties having performance that is ideal for this person. The other thing that we can notice is that at some points, the amplitudes and the bursts of the brainwave amplitudes seem to be higher in the back of the head, the parietal and the occipital cortex, which are important for visual processing and stimuli processing and brain processing speed, meaning how well and how fast the brain can process all the stimuli that is constantly presented with from the environment. And in the case of a golfer, this means talking to the caddy and selecting club, judging the distance to the flag, whether to attack the flag or land the ball in the middle of the green. When they are putting, whether they want to go with a certain distance or a certain technique into execution. So those issues are going to be greatly affected by this activity, meaning that the golfer is going to, every now and then when those bursts are happening, lose the ability to think clearly and thoroughly and be meticulous when it comes to the golf game. And golf is a game where being meticulous, being thorough, being very careful about things, it's very important. We don't want to overdo it, but we also want to underdo it. We want to be precise in the way we do things. And golfers like to have routines which can be thrown off by these issues. The other important aspect of doing this is that we can look at the brain and see where in the brain it's happening, and specifically for this particular golfer. in college or the PGA when they play the Ryder Cup or events like that, you might have team golf. But every athlete's brain is completely different. It's unique to that athlete, meaning the wiring of that brain, it's unique. It's specific to that person. And hence their behaviors, their thoughts, and that performance outcomes are going to be specific to that athlete. So with this in mind, we are helping this particular golfer deal with the issues that he is presenting from a neurological perspective. Just like if he had an injury, he's going to go to the doctor, and the doctor is going to perform a specific type of examination that might include an X-ray or an MRI of a certain part of the body, not necessarily the brain, to see where the injury is coming from and the depth of that injury. So in the mental game, we want to do the same. We want to see what's the depth of the issue for the athlete and where it is coming from. And this is not something that you can tell just by looking at the athlete, just by interviewing the athlete, or just by doing written tests or interviews with the athlete. So this helps pinpoint with more accuracy and more efficacy where in the brain the athlete is presenting that issue, why it's possibly happening, and then we can tailor the intervention to be more effective towards dealing with that issue for that athlete specifically. Because we could have 2, 3 different athletes within one sport, in this case golf, who have problems concentrating or who have emotional inhibition difficulties, and the 3 of them are going to present with a different brainwave pattern. So as much as we like to intervene from a traditional perspective, which is optimal to do, that intervention might come short to a point, hit a plateau where it's not being effective anymore. Then we need to look at the source of our behaviors, which is the brain, to see where we can interfere positively with performance. So again, the bursts are occurring here, and he has slow brain waves for the most part, but the bursts seem to be more aggressive, if you will, at some points in time, with the back of the head being a little bit more prominent in the activity. So we have slow brainwave activity. That means this athlete's arousal is low. He's going to get tired quickly. He is going to have problems focusing and staying focused for the entire round of golf. And then he's going to have negative consequences in his performance. The next thing that we want to look at is where in the brain this is taking place and why it is relevant, because different parts of the brain handle different functions, relevant to not only his athletic performance, but his life in general. So if this were to be a student athlete, then we can also increase and optimize his performance in academics and his personal life. So it's not only for the golf game, but his personal life with his family, with his friends, with his work, with his sponsors, with his media commitments is going to be much better as a consequence of knowing what's happening and then training that activity in a specific way. Having said that, we're going to look at the brainwave activity, and the first thing we want to look at is the midline, which means the middle of the brain, where we could split brain into halves. And we look at FZ. And FZ is brain structure called the anterior cingulate gyrus. And this structure is really important because it has to do with cognitive flexibility, the ability to adapt to other environments, people's personalities, to adapt to a new rule in golf, to adapt to the different schedules when they have to play, to adapt to a new caddy, a new coach, things like that. And it's also very important for attention and focus. As we can see, there's a slow, consistent brainwave pattern presenting itself, and then we also have some fast brainwave activity, which is located here. So we have some, fast brainwave activity piggybacking on top of the slow brainwave activity. And that's going to be relevant for two reasons, because the fast brainwave activity is going to put the person in overdrive, in hyper arousal and hypervigilance, meaning when this golfer hits a bad shot, he's going to ruminate on it. He's going to fret on it. He's going to constantly repeat the mistake over and over and over again in a loop in his mind, as in a movie playing in a loop. And that cannot be good, because he could be hitting a golf shot in, third hole, is the 17th hole, and he's still thinking about it. Now, this is not only for minutes or hours, this could last weeks or even months or even years. So this golfer particularly, when I asked him about it, he said that he still remembers bad shots and bad rounds from years ago, and that still affects his performance to this day. So we have an overactive cingulate gyrus, which is not allowing this golfer to have enough cognitive flexibility to let go of the mistake, to let go of the bad shot, to let go of the bad round or the bad tournament. And he's carrying that with him all the time. So he's carrying extra cognitive baggage that he doesn't need, that he doesn't require, because it's not helping in his performance. And the slow brainwave activity is going to correlate with the rumination as well, looping and ruminating, dwelling on a thought or a series of thoughts, but it's also going to affect focus and concentration. Meaning, if the athlete, in this case, this golfer, gets fixated on one particular bad element of his performance, he's not going to have the ability to think about a solution and how to overcome such that obstacle in particular, or a series of obstacles, and is not going to have the ability to be creative, which is important in golf. Be creative with the clubs. Be creative with the shot you want to hit, because it has thousands of different characteristics and different situations that call for certain creativity. So no creativity, no focus, no mental flexibility, no cognitive flexibility are the ingredients for a disastrous recipe, which is performance hindrance. Now, having a look at the midline, we want also to see whether the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere are also involved in this situation. And what we can do is just drag this channel over here. So we're dragging the midline FZ to F3, which is the left hemisphere. And we can see that they overlap. And we drag to F4 and they overlap not as well. So we have, the left hemisphere and the midline as the source of that particular activity. And for the left brain is going to be the emotional side of things, meaning whenever I hit a bad shot, information from the right brain is going to invade the left brain, and repressive coping and the ability to let go and the ability to dissociate successfully, and disconnect from that bad series of thoughts. It's not going to be possible. So we're going to end up with somebody who gets more emotional and is going to play out of anger, out of frustration, and is not going to play out of a commitment to be mentally engaged, regardless of what happens during that round. So we have the frontal cortex is engaged, which also it's involved in inhibiting impulses. So sometimes this golfer might have a tendency to hit a golf shot without analyzing it carefully, without doing the proper club selection, without doing the analysis for the yardage, the analysis for the green, taking into account the wind, whether it's upwind, downwind, crosswind, whether he wants to hit a fade or a draw or any type of shot that it's effective for that hole. So rationalization, thinking carefully about it, is just going to go out the window, and this athlete is not going to perform that well. And that goes into what we call executive functions. Having the ability to be organized both mentally and behaviorally, meaning I think about the process, and then I execute the process accordingly. If my executive functions or the executive functions of these athletes are not the way we want them to be, it means that the athlete is going to change the routine constantly. He's not going to commit to his pre-execution routine, and that might change from stroke to stroke, or even from hole to hole, or from day to day, or from moment to moment. He also is going to have trouble concentrating and organizing his thoughts, meaning I have to think about the wind, I have to think about the club selection, I have to think about the caddy, I have to think about what the caddy is telling me, I have to think about what my mind is telling me, and I have to compartmentalize all those thoughts and then execute accordingly. And with this type of activity, that's not happening because it's a mix of thoughts that are just going around in his mind, and he's just cherry picking, but he's cherry picking randomly, and he's not being able to select those thoughts in a particular order that are going to be good for the performance. So with that in mind, we would need to train the frontal cortex for this athlete to be more focused, better organized, have more control and more consistency, specifically during critical moments in competition where it counts the most. Now, looking at C3 and C4, C3 being the left hemisphere, C4 being the right hemisphere. So odd numbers are going to be left hemisphere, even numbers are going to be right hemisphere, and everything that has a Z in it is going to be the midline. So we have the left temporal cortex and the right temporal cortex, and we can isolate the channel. And we're going to notice that his athlete is producing a brainwave called mu. Now, mu is positive and it is negative as well. Mu can be observed in people with diagnosis of autistic spectrum disorders, but there are people who do not meet that diagnosis who also produce mu. Mu in traumatized people, in emotional traumatized individuals, is a form of dissociation, a form of depersonalization, disconnecting from reality to avoid physical, emotional, and psychological pain. On the other hand, mu can be positive, and that's the case for this athlete. This athlete, it's producing mu, and normally athletes who have the ability to produce mu in the brains means that they can dissociate positively, meaning they can get in the zone and get into that float state that's going to allow them to have control of the situation. And when you notice a golfer is winning and everything's going this way and distractions don't seem to bother him, and the public and the other golfers don't seem to bother him, and he's just performing beautifully, it's probably because he's producing this kind of brainwave pattern, which allows him or her to get into that state. Now, he's got it both on the left and the right hemisphere. So this is something that is actually positive for this athlete. The problem being that his prefrontal cortex is not fully engaged. And if the prefrontal and the frontal cortex is not fully engaged, well then, the mu is not going to do any good because then you're not connecting networks together. So these networks right here would have influence and shared connectivity with these networks over here, which would be essential for better performance. So it's having two parts of the brain arguing with each other all the time, and that cannot be good because that's not going to help perform well. So this is if you have, the devil on one shoulder, the angel on the other shoulder, and the devil is telling you to select a 3-wood, and the angel is telling you to go with a hybrid. And that the argument ensues, and then because this is not working well, then you end up making a mistake. You end up selecting 3-wood and going over the hole and overshooting the hole or the green. So that's the dynamic that it's taking place in this athlete's brain as we go through this. Now, the other areas of brain and the bursts are what worry me the most, because these bursts are just making the brain go offline. So I call it going into zombie mode, meaning the athlete just gets lost in space and time for that 1, 2, or 3 seconds in time. There's a total disconnection from reality in that the athlete is not paying attention to anything that's happening whatsoever. And that can, of course, be detrimental to athletic performance, again, particularly in critical moments during competition. So, when these bursts take place, the athlete gets, there appears to be a distortion in time and space. And many athletes report feeling in a different dimension, in a different place mentally and technically, execution wise, when these things tend to take place. You notice it's there once, it's here again. And the more time progresses, the more time elapses, the longer the task gets, the more complicated it gets, the more intense and repetitious and frequent these bursts get. So this is an athlete who's struggling greatly with that performance issue. It's performing greatly with it's struggling with focusing. And here we go again. So the vigilance on that athlete is not what we want it to be. And he knows that his performance is not what it can be. He's performing to a lesser level of ability that he knows he can perform at. And then here we go again. One of those bursts with disconnection, the zombie mode entering and affecting the performance. So overall, we see some activity like that, and to understand this better and to have the athlete understand this better, we can go into what we call the spectra analysis, and we're going to just filter these channels individually, and we're going to convert them into color-coded images that are going to show where and why the things are taking place. So we have peaks of different colors here that go from this amber, I guess you would call it, red and or brown, red and yellow, which are the slowest of the frequencies. We have delta brainwaves, theta brainwaves, and alpha brainwaves. And if you notice, is the theta and the alpha that are the most prominent and are diffuse, meaning they're happening everywhere. Because if you could see on the EEG, they went from the front of the brain to the back of the brain, all over the cortex. And therefore, we have slow, diffuse brainwave activity that's affecting performance. And here we have the prefrontal and the frontal cortex. And then again, we're going to have our executive functions, not thinking about the shot properly, club selection, yardage selection, depth perception, attacking the flag versus going short versus going long, things like that. F7 and F8, the ventral lateral frontal cortex, which is in inhibition of impulse inhibition, meaning when I'm upset, I'm just going to play. I don't care about course management. I don't care about club selection. I don't care about any of those things. I'm just going to play because I'm upset and I don't want to think about things anymore. Just want to get the round over with. And then again, detrimental to performance because golf is a game of being meticulous and being careful and being patient. And it's a game of strategy. And strategy in golf is probably 50%, if not more, mental, on the mental side of the game. Got T3, which normally correlates with headaches and memory issues, which the golfer reports. So he reports that ever since he was a child, he would have problems memorizing things. If he doesn't write down things, he's going to forget. So if he doesn't write down his yards and his club selection, and he doesn't write the details, he doesn't write them down, he's going to have problems remembering, and then next day he's going to have problems performing. And then we have the back of the head with the parietal lobes and the posterior temporal lobes with the higher amplitudes as opposed to the front again. A peak alpha frequency of 10, which is okay for the age, but then the learning and the memory and the stability and the stamina are being greatly affected by this slow brainwave activity. Have you noticed he's got some fast brainwave activity, which might be okay, but not enough to help the athlete produce optimally. He's got some frontal fast brainwave activity, which correlates with anxiety, and it's something that he reports, especially when things don't go his way. When he's not playing the way he wants to or the way he's supposed to, anxiety starts creeping in, and his performance starts going south. And the more the anxiety increases, the further the his performance is being hindered by that effect, by that activity. So we can also map that and see what specific frequency we have. So if we create a map of that, we're going to see that we have the left hemisphere and the midline, as we had seen on the EEG, on the raw EEG. Here we have the memory issues, verbal memory, and attending to things. So if your coach is giving you an instruction and then you don't pay attention to it because it's not integrating, you are going to do something entirely different to what you were taught in the first place. When that, of course, is going to create a disagreement and distress on part of the coach or the caddy, and battle of it becomes a battle of you said, you did not, you did too, did not, ensues. So meaning the coach tells you he told you something, and you tell the coach no you didn't, and the coach tells you yes I did, no you didn't, yes I did. And so that obviously further hinders performance. And then on the other side we have parietal lobes, which are good for depth perception and motor control. So the golf swing is going to suffer the consequences of this particular activity. And we can look further into the maps, with this being the nose, this being the right ear and the left ear. So this is the front of the head. This would be the left hemisphere. This would be the right hemisphere. We have the posterior temporal cortex, parietal cortex, occipital cortex. And if we filter those by specific ranges, then we're going to see what the specific bandwidth affecting the athlete is. And that's important because then when we train this with neurofeedback, we know specifically what range we need to target in different situations. Now the good thing is we can record in the lab, or we can record it while the athlete is executing shots at the driving range while he's putting on the putting green. So we get an idea of the brain wave patterns taking place in different situations. But this gives us a good pattern for what the athlete is presenting with. So we got those maps right here, and we can also do other color-coded maps that are going to give us an idea of what's happening. And those would be called the independent component spectra. These topographies for the independent component spectra are going to show us where in the brain most of the problematic activity is happening, and what percentage of that total brain activity it's that a specific problematic bandwidth or range is taking up. So we look at the brain, or the EEG being 100% of the activity, it's going to show us the maps in the same color coded pattern that we just saw, the red, the purple, yellow, green, etc. And it's going to show where the most active or the highest frequencies are and what percentage they are. And here we have it. So we have 19.3% on the right posterior temporal parietal right hemisphere, 13.6 for that on the right hemisphere, and then we have 13.6 for this area of the brain. And we can look into it by opening a software called Loretta, which is going to look at subcortical Brodmann areas. And we call them Brodmann areas because Brodmann was the last name of the gentleman who studied them. Now, those Brodmann areas are important because they have specific functions that we can correlate to performance and non-performance related issues. So we got Brodmann area 40 here on the right side of the brain, and we can scale that, meaning we can make this a little bit more red so that we have an idea of whether there are other areas being affected. And if I do this, we're going to see the red's going to start lining up, and then we see the other networks involved. So we got Brodmann area 3123, which is brain processing speed and stimuli processing with the cognitive flexibility. So, I'm not flexible. The brain is taking more time than usual to send info to the areas of the brain, which makes me ruminate on things, which creates anxiety, which makes me withdraw emotionally from what I'm doing and just do things out of instinct as opposed to procedure. And so we have an idea of the different areas of the brain. And if we were to open up another software called S. Loretta, then we're going to have a deeper idea and understanding of what's happening here. So with that in mind, we just load that file for that athlete, the same what we're looking at, and we have a strong correlation with Loretta in that we have Brodmann area 31, Brodmann area 7, which is premotor execution and verbal processing, and Brodmann area 40. So it's given us the Brodmann areas involved and possibly affected by this activity, the red being the overactive area, the blue being the underactive area. And then also, we can look at it from this perspective. So it's going to show us the area of the brain that it's involved in the hyperactivation and the area that's involved in the hypoactivation. So this is crucial for that golfer. And we can follow the same process with the other maps. So if we do that, then we have, again, overthinking patterns, inhibition, fears. So overthinking the shot, taking more than needed because you're doubting the distance, you're doubting the club, you're doubting the wind, you're doubting all the elements that come into play when you have to execute a shot. And then again, same processing speed and stimuli processing and mental flexibility, inability to focus, the withdrawing from it emotionally, the memory. So this is a little bit exaggerated when it comes to the scaling, but it gives us an idea of the networks involved and how intrinsic and complex the brain is in terms of the information. And it's going to be more so even for athletes who have a more highly developed nervous system than the average person. So they process better, but at the same time, there's more tendency for failure and interference of those areas. The more complex the system, the more chances it can fail. And then we do the same for this area. And here we have your anterior cingulate gyrus with your corpus callosum, the area that divides the brain into hemispheres. This being the cognitive aspect, meaning your thoughts about it, the rumination, I'm so stupid, I'm not a good golfer, how come I make that mistake? And then this is the affective regulation area of that. So we're going to try to light it up and make it more red to see whether this athlete is just being affected at the thought level or whether his emotions are also coming into play when it comes to that. And so if we light it up, we're going to see he thinks, therefore he feels. Meaning, I hit a bad shot and I start ruminating on it. How come I made that mistake? I shouldn't have done that. I should have listened to myself instead of listening to my caddy. I shouldn't have paid attention to what my coach was telling me. And then you got sadness, you got anger, you got rage, all those emotional consequences of hitting a bad shot. And it's a pretty detrimental combination because if you're thinking and feeling bad and you're starting your round and you're starting the tournament, then that's going to determine and dictate pretty much how you're going to feel for the rest of your playing time. And it's a closed circuit, a vicious circle of bad thoughts, bad behaviors that we need to interrupt. Otherwise, this golfer is going to remain like that, and his performance is not going to be what he wants it to be. So this has given us an understanding of why it's happening, and it's very important because it's coming from the source of behaviors, thoughts, and execution, which is the brain. So that brain is telling us what's happening here. And that adds value to the intervention in sports psychology or brain spotting or neurofeedback or a combination of all of those, which is going to tell us which one of the interventions could be more efficacious for this person, or if a combination of all of those can be efficacious for the person, which is the way I like to work with integration of different techniques. Now, I want to close this. I want to go to the eyes closed recording because it's important to look at the eyes closed for this athlete. And one of the things that we are noticing is we have some sensor failure here, which is going to cause the distortion of the frontal interpretation. Nonetheless, we have a specific brainwave pattern, which it's worrisome because we have a sharp vertex wave happening at ZC. And if you see it once, you are more than likely to see it again. And here it is again, and here it is again. So you see it once, you're likely to see it again and again, and that normally correlates with sleep disruption and a sleep problem, possibly sleep disorder for this athlete. Now, when I was looking at that and I asked him whether he was not sleeping well, he was able to confirm that when he goes to bed, he doesn't wake up during the night, but when he wakes up in the morning, he wakes up even more tired than the night before. And so we have, brainwave pattern of stage 2 sleep creeping in very early in the recording, meaning this golfer has a hard time sleeping well, having a recovery and recovering in restful sleep, which we saw how it affects during the eyes open recording. More irritability, poor impulse control, executive functions go out the window. Here's the pattern again, with a sharp vertex wave. So he's not going deep into his sleep cycle, and the sleep is not recovering. And sleep is very important, especially for athletes and especially for golfers, because Thursday you can play, your tee time can be 11 in the morning, and then next day you play at 4 in the afternoon, and then the next day you play at 7 in the morning, and then the next day you play at 3 in the afternoon. So there's no certainty unless you're leading the tournament, what time your tee time is going to be. And golfers play in different countries in different time zones. They have to go to Europe and Asia. So jet lag and sleep disruptions don't mix very well, causing the athlete to not being able to regulate his circadian rhythms, therefore not being able to focus and execute properly at the cognitive and behavioral and technical level. And we also know that golf is a very technical sport. The golf swing is quite complex. So all of these patterns are going to start affecting that activity. And we could see that early in the recording. We have some muscle tension, which is not real. And we have the FP2 sensor dancing, which is not real either. And then we have the asymmetry between the left visual hemisphere and the right visual hemisphere, with the right visual hemisphere produces higher amplitudes of slow brainwave activity. So even fast alpha activity, 12 hertz, 11 something hertz. So there's an asymmetry occipitally that we also need to take care of because it's not going well. And if this golfer is not able to sleep well, he's not going to be able to perform well. So in a nutshell, that's how we look at the athlete's brain, and this can help us even hone performance a lot better because we can get specific about treating and training that brain for those issues. And we have the ability to provide coaches and athletes alike with an answer as to why performance slumps partly take place and why a team sometimes goes into a performance slump and they lose game after game after game after game after game, and there doesn't seem to be a way out of it, and motivation doesn't work. Visualizing your performance doesn't work. Writing down your goals is not doing the trick. We need to look at the brain and their neuronal substrates for that specific behavior or performance issue. So thank you very much for your attention.